Hello, everyone. I'm Captain Logan, and it's not Spawn year. It's day 52 of my comic review video day calendar. And as I'm thinking about it, perhaps I should have reviewed an issue of 52. That didn't even occur to me until just now in the moment. Maybe I'll do that sometime else during the year. Maybe I'll do it on day 152. I don't know. And I don't mean the new 52. I mean the series that Greg Rucka and several other people worked on that was weekly, that was popular, and then New 52 took that number very arbitrarily and decided to just make 52 regular series. But instead, today I'm going to review a random Batman comic. This is Batman The Dark Knight, number 145. Not even a 52 there either. We're 7 away from 152. I've not been planning these well enough based on numbers and based on the day on the calendar. This is the end of a 4-part arc that I have not read. So I've just read this issue. I did this once before already on Not Spawn Year, and it was kind of interesting, so I thought I'd do it again so that we're not just reviewing the first issues of story arcs and miniseries, but sometimes the last one to see, hey, does this read by itself? Can you follow it? Can you tell what's going on? Does it even feel like it needed the rest of the issues? In this particular case, not knowing what they are, not really. I kind of feel like I get, once again, the gist of this whole story just reading this last issue. 2001, we're still in a period where very much of the time you can read an issue all by itself and still get, very often a beginning, middle, and end, and at least decent enough recapping that you can tell what you're looking at. And we are doing a lot more of the 4 to 6 issue arc stories that will become super commonplace by the 2010s and that we won't be able to get away from with monthly comics, where you can't really tell where one issue ends and the other begins, and you're reading basically a glorified graphic novel that's just cut up somewhat arbitrarily into issues. I say arbitrarily, except we still have a lot of big reveals at the end of issues for characters and that kind of thing. There is a structure to it. Very often it's kind of like a TV structure where you have 5 acts and you have commercial breaks. That's kind of how that works, but we just do, and again, we still had that at this time period, don't get me wrong, but we also had a lot more standalone issues and runs that didn't feel broken up in story arcs. A little bit more of that than we do these days, but I digress. This one is written by Chuck Dixon with art by Jim Aparo, so we've got one of the Batman, the kind of early 90s Batman dream teams here. These guys have a ton of experience in this world, and both of them not just with Batman, but with quite a few other offshoot Batman characters and members of the Bat family. Part of the reason I picked this one is because immediately it reminded me of an arc that I've reviewed before in another anthology series of sorts, which is in Batman Confidential with Lovers and Madmen. So looking at this cover, I immediately went, oh, that's weird. This isn't Lovers and Madmen, but it looks like that. I kind of thought this was maybe another origin for the Joker, which would be weird because this would only be, I think, a few years before Lovers and Madmen, right? Because that series starts, I'm looking at it here, that series starts in 2006. And this is only 5 years before that, and that was the second arc in that series. And the art on the cover reminds me a little bit of the art in that, Dennis Cohen art. But it is not that. Once I looked a little bit closer and I realized it said in the pit and not the vat of acid, I went, oh, it's a Lazarus pit. The demon laughs. So the idea here is real simple. This reads a lot to me like an episode of Batman the Animated Series. This absolutely could have been the second part of a 2-parter, or maybe even a standalone episode that just kind of begins in Matus Rest. We would do that kind of thing a little bit in that show, where you kind of just get dropped right into the action of a thing. There's usually a little bit of setup in that show, but you only had 21, 22 minutes, and so you had to be really economical with your time. And this has that, which is part of the reason that it's difficult to me for me to imagine this as a 4-issue arc. I don't know what happens in the rest of it, except that clearly the last issue must have ended on a big cliffhanger where the Joker gets killed by Talia, and Batman doesn't know who's done it. He just knows that the Joker has been riddled with bullet holes, and I also don't know why he's wearing this white suit, this kind of tuxedo. So there's probably some fun things that happen in the previous issues that explain all of that, but the idea is Ra's al Ghul and the Joker have teamed up to destroy 10% of the world's population, and we're told later on by Ra's al Ghul that that's supposed to increase exponentially. He actually says geometrically, which is kind of an odd turn of phrase. It'll increase geometrically. I don't know what the shape would be if it increases like in a triangle or in a square, but Ra's al Ghul wants to rule the world with an iron fist and get rid of the pestilence that is humanity, but, I guess keep some of us around so that there's somebody to rule. And we don't, at least in these 22 pages, get a real good sense of his motivation beyond what it always is, so he doesn't really talk too much about corruption and the terrible nature of man, so much as just he has kind of rendered himself immortal with the Lazarus pit, talks like he can live forever. Very often with Ra's al Ghul, you get the sense that he's only got so many times he can go in the pit, and then he needs someone to be his successor. That's how the animated series played it, where eventually he's going to use the pit too many times and be either mentally degenerated or physically, he's deteriorated, but he can live, hundreds of years before that happens. Here, you get the sense that he thinks he's never going to die, and that, gives him the right to do what he's doing, almost like, again, he's a god among man. And so he uses the Joker to, I guess, help him develop this weapon. I don't know exactly what part of his plan the Joker was, but he makes some kind of, we're told, like, fungal weapon. He's got a big missile that I guess he's going to, or several, I'm not sure, that he's going to send up from a submarine, or maybe shoot into the land or something, and Batman by the end is going to, I think, pretty easily stop him from doing that. But before that, he's got to save the Joker's life, because the Joker might know where Ra's al Ghul is, and Batman gets really lucky that he goes through all of this, because in fact, the Joker not only knows what the plan is, but knows exactly where, or is able to pinpoint exactly where Ra's al Ghul is, because he put a homing tracker thing in his submarine. And so at first, Alfred kind of cautions him about saving the Joker, like, isn't it a good thing that he's dying? Like, you didn't do it. It's not your fault that he's dead. Maybe we should just leave him this way. And Batman's like, yeah, but Ra's al Ghul's going to destroy the world. He's going to kill all these people. So it's kind of lesser of two evils. I have to save my arch nemesis. And then Batman thinks that Ra's al Ghul kind of planned this Alfred thinks that Ra's al Ghul planned it on purpose, that it's a poetic irony thing for Ra's, and that that he thinks he intentionally set it up so that Batman can choose to either save the world and by saving his greatest enemy, or let the Joker die and let the rest of the world die, which sounds kind of like a Joker plot before it's a Ra's al Ghul plot, really. And this is called The Demon Laughs. I don't know where in the arc, if at all, the demon actually laughs, or if the Joker kind of set up this plan and got Ra's to go along with it, and then the big turnabout, the big double cross is Ra's was playing him the whole time and then gets Talia to shoot him. I don't know if it was Talia's idea. I guess this is the problem with trying to review the end of an arc. These are all pieces of information I'm sure I would have if I read the rest of it. But anyway, I think Alfred is probably right about this. That this seems like the sort of situation where Ra's is always several steps ahead. So it seems unlikely that Ra's al Ghul would leave and it not occur. It would leave Joker dead or dying, because if he was straight up dead, he couldn't use the Lazarus pit. But he's. It turns out that he's not quite dead yet, and it seems unlikely that he would leave him there with the Lazarus pit and it not occur to him that Batman would save his life. But then he doesn't seem to have Ra's doesn't seem to have a very good plan for like a backup plan for what to do if Batman shows up, because Batman stops him in like 2 panels. Like he shows up and then Ra's al Ghul's plan is rendered inert. He can't shoot his fungal missile or whatever. And then that's it. He stops him, and Ra's is like, well, you've won the battle, but not the war, that kind of thing. He doesn't seem all that concerned about it, which makes you think that maybe this was all a lead up to even some other plan, but it can't have been, because the way he's talking to Talia later, at least than where we are right now, is he really thinks he's going to win. Like, this is it, folks. This is where I get to rule the world. So that bit of it is maybe a little bit sloppy. Also, through just kind of a side thing, through a lot of this on a first read, I thumbed through this again, I kept thinking that on every panel, Batman just had this like really angry, open-mouthed expression, because he's got that from the very first page, and it turns out that, oh, he's wearing a respirator. So the whole time I just thought this was a really weird stylistic choice from Aparo, that he's just constantly going, and he's not. He's wearing a respirator. And this is also a really bloody issue, and I think I like that style choice. I'll just talk about the art for a second. I think that's the strongest thing with this issue. I can't decide if Aparo has really evolved his art style in the last, I don't know, like 12, 15 years, or if with Batman, or if a lot of it has to do with coloring, because there's a little bit more depth than I feel like I'm used to with some of Aparo's stuff, going back to like just before and during Nightfall and stuff like that. It reminds me a lot more of Boland than I remember seeing Aparo's art before, particularly in his design of the Joker's face. It looks like almost a direct throwback to me to Killing Joke, and there are particular panels like here, the top right, where that facial expression and the shadow work and just the facial features, the depth of the face, really reminds me of Boland's art, and the coloring of the reprinted hardcover that we got years later, and I don't know if that came out before this or not, so it might just be reminding me of that, but it couldn't have possibly been based on that at all, because the coloring in that makes it look a little bit flatter in the original than the one that I'm used to. And I've had the coloring debate with people and I think on camera with Killing Joke, and it seems to just depend on which one you read first for a lot of people. But this looks a little bit like that to me. And there are a couple of places where I don't love some of the facial choices, but overall, I really dig this art. I think it's wonderfully atmospheric. I like the choice of blues here. I guess the coloring I can't help but admire in this in particular. But I also really like his design for this like slightly modified bat suit for dealing with the ocean. And it looks like kind of a fun action figure variant that maybe you'd get for Batman the Animated Series. I had, and I don't always, it's not just that, like, this is my Batman or whatever, but I really had Kevin Conroy's voice in my head through this whole thing. It reads, Dixon's dialogue for Batman, just here in particular, read a lot like it was a teleplay for that show. And I didn't really have the Hamill voice for Joker. I didn't really have anything for Joker, and I think a lot of that is just because the Joker is out of character through most of this, because the big kind of gimmick here is, or I guess the novelty is, what would happen to the Joker if he was thrown in the Lazarus pit. Like, I think the assumption a lot of people have always made is if you throw the Joker in the Lazarus pit, he'll be even more psychotic, and what does that look like, and wouldn't that be horrifying? And we're supposed to, with this cover, be really concerned with just how freaky and crazy he'll be, and that's a lot of why you'd maybe buy this issue sight unseen, even if you haven't read the rest of it, which is why I wanted to review it by itself, because I could see people picking up this cover just based on this, and then it's arguably anticlimactic, and I think the idea is supposed to be, let's do the opposite of what you expect so that it'll be a surprise, but I don't really understand why it works the way it does, and we don't get to spend any time exploring it. So when the Joker goes in the Lazarus pit, just the opposite things happen to him. Happens to him. He is briefly sane. Why? So is the idea just that it makes you like the opposite of what you are? I never got that sense with the Lazarus pit. I thought the idea was just the trade-off is you get to be immortal, but you temporarily like lose your mind for a moment, and then isn't it supposed to, because I feel like the rules are a little bit different with this Lazarus pit than what I'm used to, and given that this is, you know, regular in continuity Batman story, even though it's an anthology book, I have kind of issues with that, because I'm not sure that it matches some of the continuity that we've had with the pit before. But I thought the idea was you get a little bit more crazy the more times you use the pit, which is partly why Ra's al Ghul is willing to go as far with his plans as he is sometimes. And there's no sense of that at the end of this with the Joker, right? That, like, if it makes him less crazy, then maybe every time he went in the Lazarus pit, he would get more and more singing until he was nearly, you know, permanently cured. Like, maybe the Lazarus pit could be used to cure the Joker, but there's no talk about that. When you get to the end of this, he has fully embraced his insanity again. And I've also, like, everybody's got their Joker. There are certainly lots of different valid interpretations of this character, just like with Batman, but I've always preferred the Joker where you have to question whether he really is insane, kind of in the same way that you do Batman to some degree. The idea that the Joker actually is a perfectly lucid person who just thinks he understands the joke of the universe and is willing to do anything in his power to prove to the rest of us that anybody can be corrupted, and that we're really all just violent animals that will eat each other, like the Joker says in The Dark Knight. That's my preferred version of the Joker, and this kind of just straight up suggests, nah, he's just a psychotic, crazy person that runs around murdering people. And maybe it's because of the one bad day or whatever, who knows with this version, but he is just not all that psychologically complex here. He starts to feel bad on this page about all the people that he's killed, because now he's got his wits about him again, and then eventually it won't take very long, he'll just degenerate right back into the Joker that we all know, and then he'll argue that the reason that Batman saved him is because, so this is where Batman fights Ra's al Ghul, and he's already stopped his missile, and then Ra's and Talia seem to be dead by the end, but of course they're not going to be, and they'll come back. That happens a little bit later when Ra's al Ghul finally dies, and then he'll come back after that too, but there is a whole death of Ra's al Ghul thing. Anyway, so then at the end, Batman goes to Arkham, and the Joker is back to his insane, just laughing at everything self, and Joker says, well, you claim, Batman, that you saved me because you needed me to stop Ra's al Ghul, but to tell you where he was, and I'm glad that he actually has the information Batman needs, so that whole thing isn't pointless. But he says, I think the real reason, of course, is you can't live without me. you like having me around, he says. And he doesn't get into, and I appreciate this because we take ourselves, I think, too seriously these days sometimes with Batman and the Joker, and we can't stop like dissecting this relationship on the page. It doesn't get real deep into why Batman might want the Joker around and how he's Batman's opposite, and he defines himself somewhat based on the Joker and all of that. It's just, what would you do without me? Again, the Ledger line from Dark Knight, and then Batman turns it around and says, well, you're going to have to really watch your back now because Ra's al Ghul is after you. He kind of sidesteps that whole thing, and it's like, never mind why I did what I did. I stopped Ra's al Ghul. That's all that matters, and you're going to maybe, he doesn't really say this, but I think the idea is you're going to maybe wish that you had died when you almost did, because now you've got Ra's al Ghul coming after you, more than likely, and that is not an enemy that you want to have. So you started as his ally, now you're his enemy. You can make the argument that in a certain way, Ra's al Ghul is Batman's other arch nemesis, kind of in a much different way than the Joker, where he's Batman's kind of vigilante opposite, where Ra's al Ghul wants in some ways the same thing Batman does, but on a like terrifying macrocosm. Like he's Batman taken way, way, way too far, and the Joker is, of course, his opposite in wanting very, very much the opposite of what Batman wants, or thinking that he has to be Batman's opposite in order to help Batman best be Batman. That's a version that we do quite a bit these days, of course. That's not here. This is much more, simplified than that. But by the end, the Joker is actually terrified at the idea that Ra's al Ghul might come after him. This was a very fast read. This was an enjoyable read, particularly with the artwork. But it ended up being a little bit more of a throwaway story than I was kind of led to believe it would be by this cover. And I don't know that I really care for that interpretation of the Lazarus Pit, or really of Joker psychology, but particularly the way the Pit works. It just seems a little bit nonsensical. It's sort of like the way Clark Kent in Smallville. I've got this in the brain because we've been doing we started the 24-hour streams. It's kind of like the way Clark in Smallville seems immune to a lot of crypto-freak powers, or the opposite, or close to the opposite of what happens to other people don't happen to him, or happens to him just because he's Kryptonian and his chemical makeup is different. And you kind of have that a little bit with Joker here in the Lazarus Pit. Wouldn't it be a lot more interesting if we had that hint at the end that Joker has found a tiny morsel of his humanity because he went in the Lazarus Pit? And what if he went in it again? And what if he went in it again? And even, and if not that, what if, and again, I haven't read the other three, but what if in an earlier issue, the Joker had gotten thrown in the Lazarus Pit, and maybe we got to explore his humanity, his sanity for an issue or two? Wouldn't it be interesting to see a new Joker who doesn't want to go back, kind of a Flowers for Algernon sort of idea? Algernon. Treaty of Algernon is from Star Trek Next Generation. Algernon is the short story. What if he was kind of degenerating back into the Joker and he didn't want to? Maybe that story's been told, and maybe some of that is in Going Sane, but I haven't read that in a really long time, so I forget. You wouldn't want this to just be a retread of that, but I mean, if you're going to go there at all, it'd be kind of cool to explore it a little bit. So, I don't know. I'm a little bit lukewarm on this one, but it was a fun read, and like I said, lickety-split sort of read with a few really nice full-page spreads. It's not a super dialogue-driven issue. It's much more action-driven. And like I said, it very much felt like an episode of the animated series. Well, thanks a lot for watching, folks. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you again tomorrow with another one. I was Captain Logan, and happy reading.